Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to completely dismantle the illusion that translation is just some, mathematical word-for-word swap. If you've ever dumped a sentence into a basic online translation tool and gotten back something that sounds absolutely ridiculous, well, you already know there's a lot more going on beneath the surface of language. We're taking a really fascinating journey into the minds of master translators to see how they decode not just words, but entire worlds.
Okay, let's dive right in with a perfect example. What happens if you take a highly specific cultural phrase, like the English simile, drunk as a lord, and literally swap those exact words into Arabic? Well, the result makes absolutely zero sense to the target reader. It's completely meaningless. A literal translation here creates what experts actually call a cultural bump. It just yanks the reader right out of the text because that specific cultural comparison, it just doesn't exist in their world. So, to show you how master translators avoid these exact disasters, we're going to trace the decoder's journey. We'll start with the art of translation, tackle structural language puzzles, explore the company words keep, decode deep cultural illusions, navigate figurative language minefields, and finally, look at the ultimate translation toolkit. All right, Section 1, the art of translation. Let's look at what translation actually is at its core.
Linguistic theorist Jonathan Culler really hits the nail on the head here. He points out our foundational problem. Language isn't just about naming pre-existing things. We tend to think there's this universal concept of a tree or sadness, and languages just slap different labels onto them. But that's absolutely not true. Language is a completely different system for organizing reality itself. The concepts of one language can differ radically from another just because they articulate the human experience in completely different ways.
Moving right along to Section 2, tackling structural language puzzles.
First up, we need to define phrasal verbs. If you're a native English speaker, you literally use these constantly without even thinking about it. But for a translator, they are notorious structural puzzles. Why? Well, because their true meaning is completely hidden from the literal words being used on the page. Syntactically, sure, they're just a simple verb paired with a preposition or a particle. But semantically, they morph into this unified, completely non-transparent idiom.
Just notice the clear difference here between a transparent prepositional verb and a phrasal verb. Something like to look at is simple, it's literal. But then look at to take off. This forces the translator to decode an entirely non-literal meaning. Does it mean to remove clothes, to become airborne, to mimic someone, or, to become successful? Arabic, for example, doesn't really have adverbial particles in that same way, which forces the decoder to hunt down a specific verb-preposition pair that perfectly captures that hidden figurative meaning.
And that brings us to a crucial structural difference: how languages actually build complex ideas. See, English loves compounding, just jamming words together endlessly. But Arabic largely lacks this heavy compounding. Instead, it relies on really strategic grammatical structures. Translators use genitive constructs, which are known as the idafa, to decode these concepts. So a compound like bedroom becomes an idafa, while real estate agency becomes a noun plus an adjective. The translator is essentially, rewiring the entire architectural blueprint of the sentence. Now, this becomes a truly monumental task when you hit massive, nested English compounds. Think of a phrase like broadband integrated services digital network. You absolutely cannot just translate that left to right. The translator has to actively run through 3 strategic steps. First, syntactic recovery, literally reading backward to deconstruct the modifiers. Second, breaking down the subunits. And third, applying an idiomatic translation to reconstruct those relationships, using embedded idafas and adjectives in Arabic. It's basically linguistic reverse engineering.
Let's keep building on this in Section 3, the company words keep.
A collocation is basically the habitual tendency of words to hang out together. And the crazy thing is, it relies on completely unpredictable rules that totally defy logic. For example, why does English pair fresh with water, but salt with water? Why not sweet water? Or why do we send someone warm regards, but never hot regards? These arbitrary combinations create a massive hurdle for any decoder, simply because they very rarely translate neatly across cultural lines.
To really highlight how illogical this gets, just consider this number. The single English adjective, heavy, demands over 30 completely different Arabic words depending on the context. No joke. You can't just use one Arabic word for heavy across the board. If you're describing heavy rain, that's one specific Arabic word. A heavy smoker demands a totally different word. Heavy industry, yet another. The translator absolutely has to know exactly which company the word is keeping in the target language.
Now, elevating the stakes a bit, let's look at Section 4, Decoding Deep Cultural Illusions.
Translator theorist Ritva Leppähalme tells us that an illusion is actually split into two parts. The frame is what you literally see printed on the page, the names, the quotes. But the scene is the encyclopedic cultural reality hiding right underneath it. So the translator's true job isn't just swapping out the frame's visible words, it's reconstructing that hidden scene so a completely new audience can actually feel its intended impact.
When a translator hits a culturally loaded proper name, say a reference to a historical event or a local celebrity, they have to carefully select from these specific tactical tracks. Do you retain the name and just add a footnote? Well, that might ruin the flow of a novel. Do you replace it entirely with a recognizable target name? Careful, that might change the political or cultural weight completely. Or maybe you just omit the name entirely. It's a really delicate balancing act to maintain the text's flow while avoiding those cultural bumps we talked about earlier.
Let's actually look at this strategy in action. Imagine an Arabic text that says someone was born on the night of power, referencing the holiest night of Ramadan to imply great fortune. A literal frame translation might totally disrupt an English literary reading, right? The English reader might have absolutely no idea what the night of power even is. But by substituting it with a cultural equivalent, translating the scene as born under a lucky star, the translator achieves the exact same aesthetic and psychological effect.
Let's transition into Section 5, Navigating Figurative Language Minefields.
Similes, saying something is like or as something else, are deeply culture-specific traps. Their comparisons are strictly tied to local environments, local weather, local animals, and deeply ingrained emotional connotations. What implies pristine beauty in one culture might literally imply death in another.
Here's a fascinating puzzle for you to test your own translation instincts. How would you accurately translate the English concept of a patient owl for an Arabic reader? Just take a second to think about that. In English, an owl is wise, it's calm, it's sitting in a tree observing the world. It works perfectly. But you absolutely cannot translate that literally. Because in Arabic culture, the owl is historically seen as a terrible omen, a true harbinger of bad luck and ruin. Calling someone a patient owl would be deeply confusing, or honestly even insulting. So a master decoder must swap it out for a culturally relevant animal that actually conveys patience in that specific region, like the camel. You completely change the animal just to preserve the exact meaning.
Finally, let's pull all of this together in Section 6, the Ultimate Translation Toolkit. The renowned translation theorist Eugene Nida distinguishes between two main approaches. Formal translation rigidly preserves the original style and form. It's highly literal. But dynamic translation, that seeks an equivalent effect. It aims to trigger the exact same psychological impact on the target audience that the original text had on its source audience. And getting that dynamic impact often means you have to entirely abandon the original structural form.
So the crucial takeaway of our entire journey is summed up perfectly by theorist Gideon Torrey. He says translation is an activity that inevitably involves at least two cultural traditions. It is not a mathematical equation, folks. It is a highly complex, strategic, cultural rewriting. The translator acts as an active author, literally reshaping reality so it can be perfectly understood by a new mind in a totally new world.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with the provocative thought. Just think about the everyday idioms you use without even a second thought. Bite the bullet, kick the bucket, piece of cake. I really want you to reconsider those phrases and wonder just how a master decoder would have to unravel them, strip away the frame, find the scene, and completely rewrite them to make sense across the globe. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the hidden art of translation.